I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thanks so much for listening to my podcast. If you like what you hear, please follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and also at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy it. Today's episode was sponsored by Nest Notes, which is a company founded by a mom named Chase Simmering, who's in Miami, and they create print keepsakes that tell stories, which, as you all know, stories are like my favorite thing, whether they're family stories or stories of the places we call home. So shop kids' stationery and paper goods and little journals and all the rest at this amazing company, nestnotes.com. Oh my gosh, I did not want my interview with Jodie Patterson to end. I had a feeling it was going to be great because I loved her book so much. It's called The Bold World, a memoir of family and transformation. And it was so good. It's really one of my favorite memoirs of the whole year and probably of all time, but it was just, she's such a good writer. Anyway, here's her bio. Jodie Patterson is a social activist, entrepreneur, and writer. She has been lauded for her activist work by Hillary Clinton, The Advocate, Family Circle, Essence, Cosmopolitan, and Yahoo, among others. She works closely with a number of gender/family/human rights organizations, including serving as chair of the board of the Human Rights Capital Foundation, and is a sought-after public speaker addressing a wide range of audiences about identity, gender, beauty, and entrepreneurship. She was appointed by the United Nations as a champion for change, and perhaps most impressively, it says, this is in her bio, I'm not making this up, she is a former circus acrobat who performed in the Big Apple Circus. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, where she co-parents her 5 children with love, education, and family solidarity. Enjoy our conversation. I had the best time, and in some way, I'm going to continue this in some format, so enjoy. Welcome, Jodie. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
So classic. I love the name of your podcast.
Thank you.
And I'm so happy to be here. And I'm glad that sometimes we do actually have a moment to read.
Me too. I don't know what I would do without books.
Yeah, I have a stack of books on the side of my bed, at my desk, in my living room. And sometimes I just read, 2 pages or something like that, which many years that felt like a failure if I couldn't finish the entire book, right? And now I just really enjoy reading 2 pages, 5 pages. And so it takes me forever to finish a book, but just the process of reading without the pressure is really good.
I totally agree. I used to feel like if I didn't finish it in a certain amount of time, it was on my nightstand too long. I had to shuffle it out because there were new books. And I was always feeling disappointed in myself. And really, it doesn't have to be start to finish. A little glimpse in someone else's life and mind is such a treat.
Yeah, that feeling of not being accomplished it's probably habitual for many of us.
Yes.
I'm trying not to feel that way. But I notice myself, I have to fight the temptation to feel unaccomplished, even by not finishing a book. Who cares, right?
I know.
I'm you should have finished that. There's a new Ta-Nehisi Coates book out. You need to get on that.
Totally. I'm constantly feeling behind. Meanwhile, it's impossible to keep up on every single book coming out every day. I even put this pressure on myself once I start a series on Netflix or I'm not even finished with Normal People, and it's been so long. When am I going to finish this series? What if I forget? It doesn't even matter.
And then I think for me, and I'm probably just jumping into this off, topic conversation, but when March came and when the world changed pace and when many of us didn't leave our homes for weeks, I just remembered another way of living. And it's such a strange time. And there's so much pain and so much death, but there's something really, for me, optimistic about right now and powerful. And part of that is just the change of pace for me. I needed that. I needed a break, not a break as in a timeout, but a break, like a crack. We've seen a huge explosion, right, with COVID and with the murder of George Floyd. And in a sense, I think it is just a powerful time. We can we can change a lot of things. So I take it actually as a blessing in a sense right now, this time.
It's helpful to look at things that way. I think I know you have many kids and I have many kids and everybody's trying to do so much. It's almost impossible to keep up at the pace. And I know we were talking earlier about living in New York and not living in New York. And I also feel there's some freneticness to just living there. It's go, 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 go. And almost everyone I've talked to since the pandemic is I don't want to turn that back on. That was a lot. I had a girlfriend who's even just getting my eyelashes extended, I can't even do it anymore,
Done. I know, done. And it's funny how we all can relate to something like that. I mean, I said the same thing. I actually stopped doing my lashes, stopped with toes and fingers and all that stuff. And yet, and still, life continued. It continued. And we find new ways to be beautiful. I mean, I don't take for granted the small things in life that make us feel pretty or, glamorous, but we can find those things can be created over and over again. So it's not that we don't want the act of something pretty, but it's like we don't have to be stuck in one act, and my lashes, I actually really enjoy getting my individual lashes put in and I like the way it looked, but that's not what's happening right now. And so I found other ways. I found glasses that are fun.
I love those glasses. Those are awesome.
Yeah. And actually what I also noticed is if I do a run in the morning and sweat, then my eyes look less puffy and it's like natural makeup.
There you go.
So,
2 in 1.
Yeah.
2 benefits. Yeah, I just completely relate to all of that. I feel like if I run in the morning, I end up hobbling around. But anyway, aside from that, it's usually good. I actually started your book on audio and then switched to paper when I was reading yours. Audio is like a new thing for me. But anyway, I loved it. And it was you reading it. So it's like amazing.
Yeah.
So I feel like inadvertently, like you and I took this nice long run together and you just didn't know.
I loved writing the book, and that was over, many months, maybe 2 years, actually, I think about it. And I also loved recording the book in, an audio format. It was several days, I think 4 days of studio work, which I had never done before. And no one likes the sound of their voice. It's creepy to hear your own self speak. But the book is so intensely personal, and I went to places. I had to recall things that were really deep down and buried. I recalled them by looking at my journals and looking at letters and pulling out notes that I had scribbled down and tucked away in drawers. So I was like unearthing a lot of stuff, memories. And so when I was recording it, I was sort of really in my emotions and really in my feelings, sometimes I wasn't able to hold back the tears, just recording it. And so it took it off of the vanity level, because on the vanity level, I don't like to hear my voice, but it was such a powerful moment for me to record my own words, because those words had been dying to get out since I was a kid in many situations. So I take it like as a blessing to be able to write the book, but also then to record the book. And actually, here's a secret. Sometimes I go back and listen to my own audio.
I love that. Why not?
Yeah. Oh, man, I do. Sometimes if I just need a good cry or a good laugh.
Aw. See, this is like an unanticipated benefit of writing a book and recording it. It's like your own therapy. It's like self-fulfilling. Maybe we should back up a sec about the book and how it even came to be a book. I mean, first of all, I have to just say that since I started this book, I have been recommending it to like right and left. I was like, I love memoir and I read lots of memoirs. And this was just like stood apart. It's so good. And I've been trying to tell people, I'm like, well, it's marketed a little bit about her having a transgender child, but I think it's mismarketed a bit because that's one piece. But like, it could have been a child with anything. It's how she handled it. Like I had a child with, let's say, eczema. I mean, like, I know that's not to minimize, but it's really about you. It's about you and your life and the things that you had to deal with across the board from start to finish. And that is like it's more than a coming of age. It's like, it's just amazing from the parenting to the being parented. Okay. Anyway, now you talk.
No, I'm bursting because I'm so glad you saw that and said it so poignantly, because the book is not a story of my son. I have 5 children. One is trans. My 3rd child identifies as a trans boy. And that means when he was born, I assumed girl. I looked at the body. The doctors looked at the body and we said, oh, you have a girl. And we named that child Penelope after grandma. And then within the first year, there was all of this unrest in Penelope and anger. And by 2 and then 2.5, Penelope had become a bully. Penelope was pissed off, crying all the time. And so temper tantrums. And I really couldn't figure it out. I was, trying to do everything like change the diet, take out dairy, make everything vegan, read more stories, tell Penelope how much I loved Penelope, snuggle. And nothing worked until one day Penelope just said, Mama, everyone thinks I'm a girl and I'm not. I'm a boy. And that is like the impetus for my growth. So it's really not, and so there's so much weighs on this one kid. But as you know, a mom of multiples, your life is not one kid. And so it took me a minute to get out of the darkness of realizing that your kid is so different from anything you've ever imagined. That was pretty scary. But the real book is about, the crux of the book is about how I was able to shift my way of thinking. And you're right, that kid, that unexpected twist could be anything. I mean, as we see now, it's like COVID. Like life delivers a sinkhole, something that a fissure, something you're not expecting, and you have to deal with it. Penelope was my disruption in life, in a sense, a beautiful disruption. I thought it was going to be, the end of the family. I look back at it now and I'm laughing because I thought, oh gosh, what's it going to mean for Penelope? What's it going to mean for our family? We're doomed. And it was one of the most profound breaks in reality that forced us to create a new reality. And we're better off for it. But so the reality is, yes, any mom could listen to this or read this book, because it's really, how do we shift? How do we shift for our kids? How do we keep a flexible mind? And how do we stay with the ones we love, even when we don't understand, or even if we don't agree, even? I mean, not everyone in my house agrees on this big concept of gender. We just don't. One kid says, well, I mean, I love my brother. I'll always use the right pronouns, but scientifically, you're a girl. Like, we have to, stick to science. Now, I know that the science shows gender fluidity and gender diversity, but this is my kid also who's saying, I love my brother, but I don't believe that gender is anything more than two options, male or female. And so they've been talking this out for 10 years. They still don't agree. But they eat dinner together. They play basketball together. They live in the same house together. This is what the book really taught me, that we just don't have to agree. We have to just use decorum. We have to discuss and debate with decorum, and then shoot some basketball together at the end of the day.
Which, P.S., is like the best advice for the world at large. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like everybody right now, that is not just about within families. And I feel like every parent can relate to, or every person who's grown up in a family with many kids can relate to the incessant fighting of the stupidest things or the biggest things and not being able to agree. Because after all, I mean, yes, you have shared DNA, but every kid that comes out is like completely different, I mean, completely. Some of my kids have like nothing in common, and then others are very similar. And I'm like, where did all these people come from? It's like, it's insane. But the ability to like tolerate that and make sense and navigate. I mean, I think many grownups would be wise to heed that type of advice.
It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of time. So it's not the efficient way to run a house. Sometimes we'll sit and you're right, it's about little things and big things, like who gets the front seat in the car. It can be a massive argument. And then how do we look at gender? A massive disagreement. And so we have this process, it's called the lab, and we sit down on the floor, and each person can speak as long as they want. If you have the microphone, you speak, and you can take however long you want. And in my house, that can be hours. But, you can't interrupt, and you have to just speak your truth. And so we'll talk about gender and the identity of being trans, and we'll talk about faith. The same kid who doesn't see transgender as a reality also doesn't see God as a reality, as a scientific reality. And I'm thinking to myself, who raised you? Like, how can you be my child? I'm a member of my church, and I have a strong faith. And then here's my kid who I raised, who scientifically says that God cannot exist scientifically. And so, like, at a certain point, I'm not willing to throw the kid out.
Well, that's good.
How many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids.
You've got 4. A lot, man.
It's not 5. I mean,
well, I birthed 4, and then I birthed 3. No, I birthed 4. No, I birthed.
You should know this. You should have this part down.
Okay, so I had 3 on the earth, and I had my 4th in my belly, and I adopted a young man while I was pregnant, I believe, with my 4th. So he came technically at the end of all of the children, but he's our baby in that sense, but he's the oldest because we met when he was 18. So I've got, 3 children from my second marriage, 1 child from my first marriage, and then 1 adopted. It's really a blended family. And when you talk about being right or being with the ones you love, that's the story of blended families. there's no one right. Like there's just a million rights every freaking day.
Oh my gosh, it's true. And I loved in the book your whole story of how you ended up adopting him and like coming into it was a record store, wasn't it? Yeah. But your store was a beauty store. But I thought there was something to do with records, or he was bringing records, or something with music.
Yeah, he's really into music, and we talked for hours about music.
Yes. Okay, so in my head, I turned your beauty salon into a music. I mean, I know exactly what you were doing, but in that scene, I had you somewhere else in my head. So this is what happens when I don't read and I listen. Things are not perfect, but that whole thing. I mean, that's like just to take on another person like that, and the way you did it, and that's really amazing with all the stuff you had going on. And I don't know,
definitely wasn't planned.
I know, but still,
it's still on paper. Well, I'll say this: when I came home that month and told my husband at the time, we have a new child. The child is 18 and he's moving in. My husband thought I was really being irrational and quite dangerous to the family, right? So it sounds like, in hindsight, it's like this really beautiful story, but in the moment we had a real clash between my husband and I. I kept saying, I know it's irrational, but it makes sense in a heart way, not in a logistical way, but in a heart way. It makes sense. And he said, no, absolutely not. We cannot take a grown man into the house that we don't know. So there was like maybe a month where the two of them would play basketball together on the courts and take walks together on the pier on the Hudson River. And they got to know each other. So my, husband, who was 40 something, and this young man who was 18, they had their own way of developing their own relationship. And at the end of that month, my husband said, okay, you're right. He's special. He's ours. We're his. And we joined as a family, but it deserves its own book.
Yeah, I was going to say, you could flesh that one out pretty easily. If you write that book, and I know you're already working on other books, but a minute ago you said that, finding out about Penelope, and when he said that he wasn't a girl, he was a boy, you called that a beautiful disruption. And I think that would be a good title. So you could just, you should just store that one away for something.
Right now, I have been thinking about that a lot because COVID, well, I don't know if you know this, but I was patient 3 positive with COVID in the state of Nevada.
I didn't know you were patient 3, but I've been following your Instagram where you talked all about it. And I can't believe that happened to you. And that you were separated from your family for so long. Like, tell me a little about that. This podcast, it could be like 5 hours. I have to be careful here. I could talk to you forever. Oh my gosh. Well, tell me about being patient 3.
So I was traveling, as I do a lot for work. I was speaking, and I was on a plane, then a train, then a bus, then a plane. And it was Black History Month, which was February, which is a big month for my speaking gigs. Going into Women's History Month, March, another big month for being in conversation. So I had just been flying, and my immune system was really shitty. I was tired, changing on the plane, changing in the airport. And I get to Vegas on Friday. I speak on Saturday. By Sunday, I have this excruciating migraine and spinal pain and joint pain. And I put on some pajamas in the hotel, and I asked to make my way downstairs and asked the taxi cab driver to take me to the nearest hospital, simply because the pain was so intense. I didn't really, I knew of COVID, of course, right? We were aware of it then. No one was wearing masks. I was wiping down my doorknobs at the hotel, but I wasn't thinking that this was COVID. I had no symptoms that were typical. No congestion, no bronchial, no fever, but I had just excruciating body pain and head pain. Get to the hospital, never left. So I was there for 2 weeks, positive with COVID, 3rd patient in the state, but also I guess the lucky part was that I had an entire hospital with the attention of the entire, like it wasn't overcrowded. The doctors were attentive. And at the end of 2 weeks, I was able to come home, but those 2 weeks felt like forever. I had no one there with me. My family wasn't there. I was a bit anonymous in terms of like being in the hospital is a weird thing. You're a patient, so you're anonymous in that sense. They just have to treat you in a way that just doesn't feel very personal. I don't know how to describe that. But then also I've noticed this thing where as a woman, as a Black woman, if you don't know my title, like, I don't know, one of my titles is chairman of the board of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. If you haven't read my book, right? Or if I don't have my clothing on right, if I roll out of bed, if I don't have jewelry, or if I don't have lipstick or something that registers for non-Black people, they just I was treated like a random person. People were talking over me and around me. I didn't have pain medication for the first 12 hours. I didn't have a toilet. I kept asking for things. And it sounds like a one-off. And people will say, well, it's just what hospitals do. But it's more than what hospitals do, because I've been in the hospital a lot with my pregnancies. And I've seen it over and over and over and over again, where they just don't understand. They don't believe what I'm telling them. And I kept telling them, I'm in a lot of pain. Please test me for COVID. And it took a while for people to get to communicate with me in the way that I'm used to being communicated outside in the world. And so that was a really difficult experience to be alone experiencing without an advocate. And I'm used to being the advocate, right? So I didn't have what I needed for the first few days.
I am so sorry you had to go through that. I mean, an hour in a hospital is like a year in human time. Like, I feel like hospitals are this awful time warp, and our whole lives were treated based on who we are emotionally and everything. And once you're in the medical setting, it's your body, which half the time we pay no attention to. Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't even pay attention. My vitals, like, who cares? I have better things to do. I'm too busy for that. But in the hospital, forget it. It's like, and also there's that feeling of being trapped. Like, I remember going to the emergency room for various things. They're like, well, you can't leave yet. And I'm like, well, I'm the one who came here. Like, what do you mean? My head's fine now, or whatever it was, Anyway, so
total out of your hands.
Right?
Total.
Yes.
Right about that.
Anyway, but having to go through that and the uncertainty, and that's such an interesting point of view that you had. I mean, it's terrible. It's really awful.
And there's so many studies on that, like just how women are treated differently in hospitals, and then how Black women are treated differently in hospitals, and how we don't survive similar situations, Black women compared to non-Black women, simply because we are not taken for our word, and we are misdiagnosed, and Serena Williams, so many women have spoken about this, where their bodies are, of course, not theirs in the hospital, but also their sense of what's going on is not taken into consideration. So I had that experience with COVID, where I was really like torn from my reality, being sick, but also being in the hospital and being without family. And I had to, interestingly enough, rely on some of the techniques that I had developed from raising my son, who identifies as trans. And some of those techniques, you would think, I thought this is a technique to raise a trans kid, but it's really a technique to do with life. We were talking about that earlier. Like, I developed some skills raising Penelope that I was able to apply in the hospital to help just mother myself.
Like what?
Well, like detachment, right? And this is something, it's very, very esoteric in a sense. I think that we need to teach our children, and perhaps ourselves first as mothers, to be able to detach. And I don't mean to like disregard, but to detach from the things that define us. So as a mother, I needed to learn how to detach. Well, I'll start from, as Penelope needed to be able to detach from anything that I needed him to be. I needed him to be a girl at first, because that's what I thought. I needed him to be this really bubbly, smart, beautiful girl named Penelope, in all of these great vintage dresses and this beautiful blonde afro. I needed that so badly, because that made sense. But I had to teach Penelope to detach from certain obligations, because you cannot be free if you're always attached to things. It doesn't mean detach forever. So as an adult, as a woman, I've learned there are some things that define me. Being a mother, my children define me, my husbands have defined me, my morals have defined me, jobs. And at some point during each day or month, I detach from all of that. So my kids go to their dad's house. I don't cook a meal if I don't want to. I might do something really wild, like have sex with my boyfriend in the kitchen on the table and enjoy it, right? This is like, these moments of detachment are radical for women. They're radical for our children. They don't last very long. My kids come back and I go back to the routines, but I'm better. I'm more creative. I'm looser. I'm, no pun intended, I'm more, flexible in my mind. I am a better leader. I have more vision. So I had to detach in the hospital. And I had practiced that with my son, Penelope, and with my children and with myself. And then in the hospital, I was able to detach in a sense where the hospital did not bring me down 100%. It didn't scare me 100%. It didn't make me depressed 100%. I was able to kind of detach myself and hover above it all. Some people call it meditation.
I like the detachment. And by the way, I have the same thing as you, and I have so few people who I ever talk to about it because I'm remarried. I got divorced 5 years ago. I have a new husband. We don't have the kids every other weekend, and I have like a dual identity. It's like who I am on like today versus who I would be if you talked to me Friday is like night and day. And it's amazing. And then I'm like so revived because I have time to remember who I was, right? It's just insane that I mean, it's hard. Like I feel, and I don't know how you feel, but like sometimes when the kids are gone, I'm just like crying. I just can't stop. I feel so like torn apart. Other times I'm like, well, this isn't bad. But either way, when they come back, I'm better off for it. But I don't know. It is crazy, that detachment that you're talking about and the two parts of being a mom. And then when you're without your kid. Anyway, we should just have some coffee at some point.
Yeah, we can swap stories. I think we get better at detachment over time. At first, it feels reckless.
Yes.
To the women. I mean, there's so much around this. We derive our worth from our children, from others. We are really taught how to be good wives and good mothers and good citizens and good employees. And much of the work, much of the profit of families and of I would say the world is on the free labor of moms and women, right? We really have supported a lot of things. And so we understand how important we are to anchor our families. But so when we are away from that, it feels reckless. It feels guilty. I feel guilty about it. But over time, I have learned how important it is, not just for me selfishly, but for my children, for me to learn how to detach. Because I'm telling you, when I come back to them after that week or hour, I'm better. I'm better at raising them. So it's not like I'm just doing it for myself. I think we should be doing things for ourselves, but also the upside of detachment is when we come back to our team, we're better leaders. And that to me is the goal. I want to be a really good leader of my team, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Amazing. So I just want to ask a couple quick questions because I feel like anyway, what books are you working on now? Because you said you were hard at work. And then I want some advice for aspiring authors.
Okay, so I wrote The Bold World, which is the first book, my memoir. And then I wrote a children's book entitled Born Ready, The True Story of a Boy Named Penelope. And I wrote that with the help of my children because I wanted the child's perspective, Penelope's perspective of how he helped his communities to change and to shift and to support him. So The Bold World was my story, but the true story of a boy named Penelope is Penelope's perspective on it. So my kids helped me with the language and they helped me with the storyline, and that will come out at the end of the year.
Exciting.
And that was really exciting to do, a children's book. And then my third book that I'm working on now, which is still taking me some time, is about radical parenting and these sort of lessons that I've learned over time that develop in the home, but can be used beyond the home. So it's looking at mothering as sort of like this architectural power structure.
Ooh,
you can get into. Yeah, so it's not like, I'm not talking about mothering like hugs and kisses mothering. I'm talking about the strategies that some mothers have used to build up our community of children. And then you can take that strategy, and I use it actually in the boardroom. I use it on the streets or in classrooms or in startup communities when I'm going to talk to businesses. It's mothering as an architectural power structure.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm here if you need a proofreader or something. I need that book like tomorrow. I need better management of my community here. That's awesome. Any advice to aspiring authors?
Yeah, I like to brain dump. And I think it's really scary to write a book or to even conceive of writing a book. So I like to start with brain dumping. And that is get a journal or get several journals and or your laptop and just brain dump on a topic. Don't think of structure, don't think of order, and spend a few months brain dumping on topics. Like I have about 1,000 notes that were just brain dumps that turned into a book. And then, so brain dumping is one great way if you're really interested in writing a book. And then this is a big leap after that. Find an agent. Because it is really a business, and you can't write a book and then think it's going to just get published. You need a team. So I guess get an agent also can be broadened to start thinking of the structure of the team. So you need an agent, you need a publisher, you need a best friend who might want to read some of your pages. I have a few friends of mine that read my brain dumps, and they go, ooh, that's a good point. Build on that. Or that's the book. Forget everything else. That brain dump right there is the book. So I'd say brain dump first, and then start to build your team with agents and possible best friends who can help you edit through your brain.
Wow. Well, I might have to borrow your best friends at some point. I think I'll start sending them my emails and see what happens. If it ends up in books as good as this, I mean, you know. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't even want to stop talking to you because I have like 1,000 other things. I didn't even read any of my quotes. I have like every other page is like dog-eared in here. Oh my gosh.
Give me one quote.
Give me one quote. I'm going to pick one at random.
Okay.
I thought this was ridiculous, thinking lingerie could dissolve what I knew was sexism, plain and simple. But I tried taking my mother's approach of being less combative and more grateful with Joe. Sometimes it worked, and I could hold my tongue. But as the disparities in our relationship grew, it became harder for me to diffuse our fights. And often I was adding my own fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
That's just like sticking my finger anywhere in this book is like a passage like that. So anyway.
That quote is, you're the only person that's told that one out in all the conversations that I've had. And that quote to me was that moment with my mom was so important. I had been battling with my husband at the time on so many different topics, power and children and money and all the stuff that we battle on. And I confided in my mom, and she said, well, what about lingerie? Because lingerie, men love lingerie. And if you put some on, it will make everything better. And I was just frustrated by the fact that we have for so long just not called sexism for what it is. And we're seeing that now, I mean, in the Me Too movement. And we have not called racism for what it is. And we're seeing that now in Black Lives Matter. And we haven't called so many things out for what they are. And I think as we get older and more mature, we just start to not want to lie about stuff anymore. We want to call it for what it is. And so you noticing that, you're definitely on the mom side that just no longer wants to keep quiet about stuff. We're on I've got to call it for what it is at this point.
P.S. My mother, in my previous marriage, which I shouldn't even be talking about, but was like, put on some lipstick, put makeup on when he gets home, have a drink ready. Come on, like show him your best. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. How was that?
Have a drink ready? What about my frickin' day? Like, anyway, so I think I related to that advice from an older generation that, yeah. So I think that's what made me pull it out. But among a zillion other things that I was like, oh yeah.
That's the one.
That's the one.
And it's a generational divide in some ways. And, you know, my kids have pointed out ways in which my language was all wrong. And I think, as my mom did, and as I have done, we've shifted our language. Mm-hmm. I mean, my mom from that, today, my mom is on board with a new approach to life. I'm on board with a new approach to life. And we've listened to our kids. She apparently listened to me a little bit, and I definitely listened to my kids when they were just like, Mom, if you don't change, you're just going to be old and weird, and no one's going to be around you anymore.
That's so true. That might be the best advice of this whole conversation. If you don't change, you're going to be old and weird. I feel old and weird like every day these days. So yes, that is great advice.
Yeah.
Aww. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I hope we can continue this in some form one way or another. And yeah, thank you for this amazing memoir. And I just loved it. I just loved it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will come back anytime. We can pick this conversation up at any moment.
Perfect. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Jodie. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening to my podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you liked this episode, please follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, and sign up for my mailing list at zibbyowens.com so you can always hear about the latest things I'm up to. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much to nestnotes.com for sponsoring today's podcast. Check them out for some amazing print keepsakes that tell your family stories. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music. Thanks for listening. You could always email me at zibby@zibbyowens.com.